soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, worship Your holy name. The sun comes up.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome. And sorry we're a couple minutes late there, but glad to be with you. And of course, Jerry is sitting to my right, not Marty Radovanik. I don't know where he is.
I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what he said he was doing.
Yeah, I saw his wife today, but I don't know what he's up to.
Goofing off.
Yeah, goofing off someplace. But anyway, glad to be with you and talking about a very, very important topic, I think, for us, this idea of human dignity and the very grave violations that the church sees to this human dignity. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about gender theory and sex changing and things like that toward the end. Got a lot to say about that. Hopefully, we'll say it in a very, very charitable and kind and Christian way. But let's begin in the prayer as always. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, bless us as we ponder on this great, great feast of Pentecost, where we desire every single person to be filled with your Spirit and come to know what it means in their life, to live in their circumstances, to live like you. Bless us today that we might gather here together as believers, as your followers, as a people that are always, always seeking to share your good news. And we ask all these things through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
And thanks to the folks who said happy anniversary. And I saw Betty, Betty goes to St. Benedict, and happy anniversary to Father Dave too, because we got ordained together. And it was a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day to celebrate this 50th or 40th anniversary on the Feast of Pentecost. That was an awesome thing.
Feels like yesterday, right?
It feels like yesterday on one level, but it's almost like a lot of water under the bridge. It's 40 years with all of that too. So, yeah. So, Jerry, why don't you take us where we need to go here?
Well, we're going to be discussing the document on human dignity, and I would suggest that everybody find it, download it, and read it for themselves. It's an easy read.
Vatican,
yeah, it's an easy read. There's a lot to it, and I think if you read it slowly and prayerfully, it'll mean a lot to you and clear up, I think, a lot of things.
Yeah, I think so too. And there's certain things in it that are very easy to understand, some other things that aren't quite so easy to grasp.
No, yes. Well, so just to start out very basically, though, why do we rely on the church to define these things for us?
That's a really, really good place to start, I think, for all this. And you made the analogy, and we can say that in the beginning. We don't want to say that when we get into the details of all this. And it's almost like, well, let me just start off by saying this. I think the big thing is we need to realize that we need an authority to look at these things above and beyond our preferences, our politics. And we're going to say this over and over again. In the United States, our science and our politics and how we see things, our science and our politics, they get confused a lot of times. And how we see things oftentimes are through a political lens as opposed to a Christian lens and a scientific lens. I have no concerns about looking at things scientifically. I have grave concerns of looking at things politically because it is so subjective,
right,
in so many different ways. And so we oftentimes even our science gets kind of skewed by our politics with all that. And I forget who it was that said at one time, they said, I know people that give up their religion for their politics every day.
Right.
And we kind of do that. And that your analogy was, and I think it's well said, if we're humble enough to hear what you said to me the other day, we need an adult in the room. Somebody that's going to like talk to us about these things in ways that we need to think about them objectively. Plus this, the Catholic Church is the only entity that I can think of that talks about these things in an objective theological way. I'm not saying every person in the church. I'm saying the church, when they put out documents like this, they're trying to get at objective truth. They're trying to get it. Now, certain things are difficult, like these days, gender theory. And much debate about all that, and we should continue the debate. But I think the only one who engages all these issues is the Catholic Church. I know no other entity that tries to do that, and tries to do that in a way, especially in the area of the Vatican, in a very, very human, dignified way, but a way that tries to capture the truth of a situation. We can talk about it, debate about it, but we need desperately to listen. And I think the church has something to say.
Right. Yeah. And, and thank God for that in a way that we have some guidance.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise we'd be a huge mess. Yeah. And I get just also too, tradition and liturgy, scripture, all that together works together for all that.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the analogy of like in a soccer game, you just don't throw the ball on the field and say, have at it. There has to be referees.
That's a Nicky Gumbel reference. Yeah. But the whole thing of, you got to have some rules. You got to play the boundaries in a way, be able to really play the game. And so how do you, and I can't want to say the human condition is a game, but we have to be able to, there's a morality to all this. Sure.
Well, yeah, and again, this is a large document, so what we're going to do is there's some stuff it's obvious, like war, and that we're not going to have debate about.
Or poverty.
Poverty and those sort of things. So we're addressing a few key issues here tonight.
Right, yes.
And I want to start off with a key statement, and the introduction says, the Church sees the condemnation of these grave and current violations of human dignity as a necessary measure. For she sustains the deep conviction that we cannot separate faith from the defense of human dignity, evangelization from the promotion of a dignified life, and spirituality from a commitment to the dignity of every human being.
Yeah, so the whole beginning, and we're going to talk about this for just a little while here, the whole beginning of this document talks about this whole issue of human dignity and what it is. Not personal dignity, and they go on and on about that one. We're not going to talk about that. But they talk about human dignity, which is different from personal dignity, because personal dignity, once again, gets very subjective.
Right.
Human dignity, something is much more objective. So we need these necessary measures and these things to talk about. So, like, for example, evangelization. You're not going to evangelize a starving person.
Right.
We're going to feed them first.
Yeah.
We're going to give them their human dignity first. And so the whole thing about all this, it's somewhere along the way that we must promote human dignity if we are going to be able to walk our talk. We need to treat people for who they are, made in the image and likeness of God. Yeah. Yes, we have to do that. Yes.
Yeah, and the thing to keep in mind, this document is really written in love, and we're hoping that this show tonight, we're speaking in love.
Oh, yeah.
Because everyone that suffers from these things, or is, I want to say everybody with a certain belief is suffering if they don't agree with it, but
Right,
and they may be in some sense, but we're looking at this from the compassionate side.
Yeah, and by the way, you can completely disagree with us, and you are welcome. I don't know. I even looked here at anybody.
And since I'm walking and chewing gum at the same time, it's going to be. I'm going to try to keep an
looking
eye
over here a
on
little bit.
comments. But
Any comments you guys would make, but please don't. We're talking about the issues. We're not talking about people here. And so somebody walks in, disagree, man, you are welcome. We're going to just keep trying to talk about it, and hopefully we'll do it in a mature way. So, yes. Yeah.
If the Church makes herself present in the defense of or in the advancement of human dignity, she does so in line with her mission, which, although it is religious and not social or political, cannot fail to consider man in the entirety of his being. Explain that.
Correct. And I just think that the church has a responsibility of having a prophetic voice, a voice that tries to speak in the midst of all the confusion going on in our world today. And I think also, too, like if I say that, the church is a prophetic voice, and you're probably thinking, yeah, but look at the clergy scandal. You know what I mean? And I think the clergy scandal has set us back tremendously from being able to have this moral voice, this prophetic voice. But at the same time, I think in many ways, I look back at the clergy scandal, it's sort of, I don't know, it awakened me
Right.
in many ways.
Yeah.
And like, I think in one sense, in my own life, I was sort of like, walking around in a manner that ignored some of the failures of the church in many ways. Well, you can't do it now. And so I think the church has a mission to speak to these things because, again, they are the voice that we should be depending upon to be able to speak to these things. But often, and I think the clergy scandal has really hindered our authority to speak about these things.
Right. Okay. Trying to move through this quickly, so we're not going to get too deep in each of those weeds. But
yeah, sure.
From the start of his pontificate, Pope Francis has invited the church to, quote, believe in a Father who loves all men and women with an infinite love, realizing that he thereby confers upon them an infinite dignity.
There you go. That, I think that's what you were trying to say in just a minute or two ago, that every single person that walks in our church, walks in our, and they need to be they are loved infinitely, they are loved completely, totally, and they have an infinite dignity. Now that's pretty huge. In other words, there is, in a sense, nothing that can take away their dignity as human beings. That's our claim, no matter what.
Right.
Yes. So that's an important one.
Just to help with some of the religious speak that's often in these documents and so on, could you define and distinguish between ontological, existential, and social dignity as they talk about it on this?
We'll try to do real quickly here. Ontological means the nature of being. In other words, human beings have a dignity by the very fact that they're human beings. That's what we mean by ontological. Existential, we're looking for people to have a dignified life. In other words, in their condition, in the world they live. Do they live in a world where there's peace? They live in a world where there's goodness. One of our areas of an undignified life are the travels of migrants. Here are a bunch of people that do not have existential safety, do not have an existential world in which they are safe, free from violence, and able to find proper work and a place to raise their families. So they're in existential crisis. So in that sense, that's what we mean by existential. And then social will be just in everybody's social condition, their illness, how their situation in which they find themselves living in that moment of their lives would be the whole idea of the social. The church talks about this ontological dignity, their existential dignity. So these are these words, really not theological ones, more sociological in many ways, but words that are important for us to talk about. So they define dignity in so many different ways because they're trying to stay away from more subjective understandings of what dignity is.
Okay. Jesus reveals, we're going to paragraph 12 now, reveals the dignity of the needy and those who labor. In biblical language, the little ones are not only the children, but also the vulnerable. You've always talked about this.
Yeah,
the most significant, the outcast, the oppressed, the discarded, the poor, the marginalized, and so on.
Where did Jesus go all the time? He went to the little ones. And the little ones aren't just children, even though children had no rights in that world that Jesus lived. They were it's the weak, it's the poor, the most insignificant. It was the lepers. It was the ones who weren't able to keep the law for a reason. It was the widows. It was those kinds of people that are the little ones that now here we're the churches by the action of Jesus. We're claiming their objective human dignity with all that too.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Now we're getting into more contentious topics here of our time as we discuss individual freedoms and rights, one's own freedom. Pope Benedict says, quote, without the corrective supplied by religion, though, reason too can fall prey to distortions, as when it is manipulated by ideology or applied by a partial way that fails to take full account of the dignity of the human person. Such misuse of reason, after all, was what gave rise to the slave trade in the first place and to many other social evils, not least the totalitarian ideologies of the 20th century.
I think it's kind of bold, and Pope Benedict, whenever he says in that, without the corrective supplied by religion. So religion is meant to apply a corrective and all that. And here we are in this secular world we live in today, a world that there's this incredible hunger for meaning. It's kind of funny. I was at this wedding we had I had on Friday. I was in my homily. I was talking a little bit about this longing, this spiritual hunger that's going on, and I knew people in the congregation that were there. Many of them were not terribly religious or of that kind, and they're all still kind of nodding their heads. That there is this tremendous spiritual hunger going on. The secular world in which we live in has caused this terrible spiritual hunger that many, many different people have. Now, the sad thing is that they walked away from religion because religion wasn't really speaking to them. And I think they walked away from very, very bad religion many times, because I think religion in many ways has much to say if it's articulated rightly and clearly. So Pope Benedict, I think, was a really clear thinker in many, many different ways. And without the corrective of religion, and that what happens is we go all over the place. We allow things, there are these ideologies that are everywhere that try to manipulate us. And we're going to try to hear from one of them at the end of the show. We have a video we want to show you at the end of the show here today by a lady that's trying to correct a ideological argument about transgender and about the whole idea of sex change and the different. What's the difference between ideology and science in the midst of all that? So I think that's all kind of important. And so I think, therefore, what he's saying is that religion, and I would say most especially the Catholic Church, is a corrective to these rampant ideologies that are flying around out there in our world today. And it goes on, not the least of the totalitarian ideology of the 20th century. Adolf Hitler. Folks, people, they bought in, man. Germany bought in, lock, stock, and barrel. Same thing with Stalin. Not so much the people in Stalin's world, because they don't think it cared that much that they bought in. But in Germany, people bought it. They were drinking the Kool-Aid, and they bought into all that. And it was, and religion would have been a great corrective, but never quite happened that way.
Well, this ties into then there is an ever-growing risk of reducing human dignity to the ability to determine one's identity and future independently of others, without regard to one's membership in the human community.
Well,
this is what stands out to me
way.
when I see all these protests and movements and everything. They all seem like, even though there's lots of them in the same street or room, it's very individualistic, isn't it?
That's interesting you say that. I don't know, because you get a chance to talk to them.
Yeah, you're judging the individual.
I think in many ways, though, that might be true, but they're very subjective in what they're looking at. They don't see the big picture. Right. Now, they're saying that when we talk about human dignity, we cannot talk about human dignity as personal dignity, as opposed to overall human dignity, because we have to be thinking of the rights of others alongside. There goes back to your soccer game analogy. There are certain rules that we have to live by. For example, let's suppose my own personal dignity, I decide that I will never stop at a stop sign ever again as long as I live. This is my right, and my own personal dignity. Well, I'm going to wreck eventually.
People are going to die if
people
we
are
don't
going to
agree
die.
on what a stop sign is, right?
So you have to be a society of laws. Now, we say these kinds of things sometimes in the media. I hear people, we have to be a society of laws. I agree. Yes, I agree we have to be. But let's make just laws too. Let's make just ones. And so we have to be a society of laws that actually live within the parameter that make sure that everybody's human dignity is respected, not just my own. And there's Americana right now. Individualism, I think, is very, very much rampant in our culture today.
I think we should then, before we get into our grave violations, which is our major topic coming up here.
Yeah.
Freedom is a marvelous gift from God. Even when God draws us to him with his grace, he does so in a way that never violates our freedom. Thus, it would be a grave error to think that by distancing ourselves from God and his assistance, we could somehow be freer and thus feel more dignified.
Yes, I would
That's
say that in here, let me be kind of biblical here for a moment. Hail, full of grace, to Mary. When you and I are full of grace, we are completely, totally free as individuals. When we are in right relationship with God, we are completely, totally free. Like Mary could have chose one way or the other with all that. And when you and I are in sin, we are enslaved to something, somewhere along the way. So, we always say that there's such a thing as freedom to choose against God. But really, when we choose against God, that's not a free act at all. That is an act that is somewhere along the way, we're going after an apparent good in some way that kind of draws us in a certain way, where we're really not being free in all of that. The only way we are truly, truly free is when we are in right relationship with God. And sin, by its very nature, takes away our freedom. If you and I are in mortal sin, we are completely unfree. I think we are complete total slaves to something.
right.
So we have to, the idea of freedom as something I can just do what I want when I want to, that's a myth.
Yeah.
That's not a myth, excuse me, that's a misuse of the word myth. That's false. That's
Even if it
completely false.
could sustain itself, how free would a child be without his parents?
Yeah,
You know, just, you know.
And so children aren't really, they're pretty kind of selfish things
Right.
at that point in their lives, but they learn to be truly free. To be truly free is to be full of grace, as opposed to being able to do whatever I want. That's true freedom. So anyway, I guess we
Okay.
can go up to that.
Yeah, we're going to move. We're kind of on time here for what we're trying to do here. We're going to move into some of the grave violations of human dignity. And the document states, every human being has a right to live with dignity and to develop integrally. This fundamental right cannot be denied by any country. People have this right even if they are unproductive or were born with or developed limitations. This does not detract from their great dignity as human persons, a dignity based not on circumstances, but on the intrinsic worth of their being. Unless this basic principle is upheld, there will be no future either for fraternity or for the survival of humanity.
Yeah, so
There's a lot there.
each person has I'm going to just, somebody said something, the hunger for religion is why so many weddings occur in the decommissioned churches that have been into banquet halls. I agree, Chris. I agree with that. Yeah. The hunger for religion is why so many marriages occur in decommissioned churches that have been into banquet halls. That's a very interesting statement. So what you're saying, Chris, is that the decommissioned church, they're still looking for something sacred.
Yeah,
Is what you're trying to say?
want a connection, I guess is what Chris was saying.
I think that's true.
Not too much of one.
But
yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit of one with all
Yeah,
that.
right.
So, so anyway,
So-
I was listening to that right there, and I kind of got a dignity based not on circumstance, but on intrinsic worth of the person. So, yeah, we're talking about the intrinsic worth of the person. Yes, we are. That's what we're talking about here. Yes.
So let's get more specific here. The travel of migrants, big issue today.
Yes, it is.
Migrants are among the first victims of multiple forms of poverty. Not only is their dignity denied in their home countries, but also their lives are put at risk because they no longer have the means to start a family, to work, or to feed themselves. Once they have arrived in countries that should be able to accept them, migrants are not seen as entitled like others to participate in the life of society, and it is forgotten that they possess the same intrinsic dignity as any person.
Sure. So I think basically with this whole thing, I think that what you just read to us is very, very important. And I think we in the United States, we get caught up in our politics. The reason why the border in our southern border is such a mess has nothing to do with migrants. It has everything to do with our politics. As you all know, there was a bill presented or something that to Congress at one point that pretty much everybody agreed would fix the problem in many ways. It happened about 6 months ago, but because of the political divide in our Congress, they refused to pass the bill. So it isn't that there's one party or the other is right or wrong in all this. I think the real reason is because they're fighting with each other and going back and forth. The thing that you and I as Christians have to ponder in all this is that these migrants are just simply, and by the way, this is going on all over the world. This just isn't our southern border.
Right.
This is going all over the world. All this is happening in different ways because people are moving around to try to be able to find a place to work, a place to feed themselves, a place to start a family where they were denied all those things in their homes. And I think we need to be able to try to understand this issue beyond the issue of politics. That quote you just gave, it goes on, it says, we can show that we consider them less worthy, less important, less human. And that's where the church struggles. The migrant, send them back, get rid of them. Don't let them back into our country. And by the way, we continue to say they're all bad. They're all a bunch of murderers and rapists and killers, which is not true.
Yeah, right. Now, I think to be fair to some that oppose this, that there are a lot of bad people coming through in ways that if they weren't bad, they wouldn't be coming in the way they are, some of them, you know. And all the countries are struggling with that.
And by the way, there's no doubt we should have, our issue to border is wrong the way it is. There's no doubt about it. It is a confusing big mess. I'm saying it's confusing big mess, not because of the migrants, big mess because of our
Yeah, and we
politics.
don't want to do the hard work with like helping people integrate, you know.
Yes.
One of my first employees was from Argentina, and he said, and they're having this big problem in Europe, you have to come up with a way to make sure people integrate. You know, when my wife's grandparents came from the Ukraine, they came here, they went to work in a steel mill, couldn't speak English, but the mill, the company, and other people help these people learn the language and integrate. And we don't have the right pathway for them to do that because there are a lot of great people that could come here if we gave them this chance and helped them.
Yeah, and if we did have laws that were good, and my brother Russ, you can speak up on this one if you're watching us. That he worked in Florida, and I think there was a bunch of undocumented that he used in his business there too. They were great workers, many of them were, and just trying to find a better life. Now, there's a lot of other issues and all that, but in the same sense, the travel of migrants is one of those big issues.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
In my Archie Bunker moments, I always say, let's send the people, able-bodied people here that won't work to Mexico and trade them for these, because these people coming from Mexico that work, they work hard.
They work hard.
They work very hard.
They work very hard.
God bless them.
Yeah. So anyway, yes. On that one, yes.
We did the migrants. Okay, there we go into digital violence. We were discussing this afternoon with somebody says, what do you mean by digital violence? Mm-hmm. Although the advancement of digital technologies may offer many possibilities for promoting human dignity, it also increasingly tends toward the creation of a world in which exploitation, exclusion, and violence grow, extending even to the point of harming the dignity of the human person. And
So just real quickly,
we have a lot of examples that you're going to read from the paragraph.
I'm going to just show some examples. Digital media can expose people to the risk of addiction, isolation, gradual loss of contact with concrete reality. I think a lot of times I worry about that with some of our young folks
Hiding
too.
in your basement, yep.
Yeah, blocking the development of authentic interpersonal relationships. How many people's relationships are primarily online in some sense? And this is where you find relationships. I know a lot of people are very lonely or seeking relationships there and then getting burned very, very deeply. Not all. New forms of violence are spreading through social media. Cyberbullying, we all know about that one that's going on there. The internet is also a channel for spreading pornography and the exploitation of the person for sexual purposes or through gambling. They're finally getting into gambling. You know, anybody that watches any sports events realize all these gambling apps that are coming up and the different ways they're trying to coerce you into gambling. If you have a gambling addiction, you like to watch sports, you're in trouble, man.
Now it's a lot like the dealers will give someone drugs for free, so they get hooked on.
Oh, sure.
And the ads come right out and say, "Your first $1,000 net loss, we got you covered."
Same thing.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. Well, okay, you know, and boy, if I just one more time, you know, I'm going to hit it. You know?
Yeah. I'm gonna win the lottery here, and I'm gonna be set for life.
Yeah.
I heard of a person
Such a
one
shame.
time that actually in gambling they actually made like $500,000 or something like that. Now they could have went home and been fined for a long time with all that.
Yeah.
But they couldn't stop themselves, so they lost it all.
Yeah.
They lost
Yeah.
every penny of it again. So
That's why it's a business, because it works on the side of the
yes,
business.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
Now this is, I think, a lovely, benevolent pie in the sky thought, and but hey, maybe it's something we can achieve. In this perspective, if technology is to serve human dignity and not harm it, and if it is to promote peace rather than violence, then the human community must be proactive in addressing these trends with respect to human dignity and the promotion of the good. Quote, in today's globalized world, the media can help us to feel closer to one another, creating a sense of unity of the human family, which in turn can inspire solidarity and serious efforts to ensure a more dignified life for all. So that's, I thought we had this discussion this afternoon. If there was a news channel that really did just only carry stories where people are getting along, where there's a lot of stories out there where people on both sides of the political aisle, motorcycle guys and Black Lives Matter people are all agreeing on we have to do this about diabetes and things like that, But that's what I think they're getting at, is because the media is so good at dividing us. It's just a decision
We bought
to not divide.
Yes.
But dividing sells soap and whatever you're selling that night, cars.
Or whatever else it is. Yes.
Yeah. Do you have more to say about
Nope.
that? Or we're going to move on.
That's fine.
Okay.
Nothing.
I want to go too fast here. We have things planned, folks, and we're trying to time things out here. So, although we're about ready to get into the weeds now. Abortion. In our demand for freedom, do we have obligations outside ourselves? Can I read this thing about what Trish Harrison had to say?
Yeah, Trish Harrison was on she spoke at my adult ed class. She's an Anglican priest, and the title of our adult ed class, our adult faith formation, is The Practical Way. And she gave the testimony in that today. So I remember you speaking about her a while ago. She speaks very profoundly about abortion. I said to people, oh, here comes this lady this Anglican priest who speaks and writes editorials to the New York Times.
Yeah, she's an opinion columnist for the New York Times, who does have their few conservative voices. I don't think she'd want to be called a conservative, but but she makes her pieces make so much sense, and she's actually no longer at the New York Times. But and she talks about bodily autonomy. She discusses the necessary limits in our society to physical autonomy and states, the natural state of human beings is to be deeply and irrevocably interdependent on one another, as opposed to separate from one another. She quotes Simone Weil, who says, if we need a collective declaration of human rights, we also need perhaps more desperately need a declaration of human obligations. And I think that's really powerful.
And my big question, and ladies who are watching us right now about the whole abortion issue, and I watch it, and again, I'll say this over and over again. We politicize everything, and the science gets lost in all of this. I think that, I guess I'll get political here for a moment. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, and all of a sudden it went back to the states, and the Republicans began to be radically, I don't want to say pro-life, but radically, they wanted to get legislation that was right. It made the political left so militantly opposed to that they created all kinds of pro-abortion people, and it made it worse as opposed to being better. I just think that we got to stop legislating this stuff and try to change people's hearts with all this. And over again, and ladies, this is the part I want to ask you about with all this. I keep hearing about the reproductive rights of women. Now, here I am, 72-year-old white man who's never been married and been a priest for 40 years today with all this. So I get it. I mean, you could say all those things to me that you want.
But you've heard it all too.
Yeah. So
anyway.
I get it. And I hear about the reproductive rights of women, and I get that too. And you have a right to that. Absolutely. There are reproductive rights for women. My only question in all that, what about the unborn? Or do they have any rights? We're talking about on the left in one sense. We keep talking about it, like different rights. We will, I'll skip the left to right, whatever, but we keep talking about the rights of the people in Gaza. Yes. The rights of Israel to have an independent state. Yes. All those rights of the Palestinians too. Yes. But when are we going to be able to give the most defenseless of us all, the unborn, their equal rights too? When are we going to treat and this whole idea that life does not begin at conception, I would suggest, is more politically rooted than scientifically rooted in many ways. I think we could make a really strong scientific argument for conception being the beginning of human life. Like, let's suppose we say, okay, so when does human life begin if it's not a conception? Let's say it begins at 6 months. Okay. Then we can abort before 6 months. Let's suppose human life begins when somebody's a year old. Let's suppose we decide as a society it begins when somebody's 12 or 18 or 21. Does that mean the other ones have no rights whatsoever? It seems arbitrary to me. In many ways. Does that make sense?
Yes,
I'm not a doctor, and you guys can help me here.
There's a sentence here I'd like to read, if you
Sure,
about
please.
what just Harrison said. A 1-year-old baby is dependent on adults for nourishment, protection, and care in ways that can be profoundly burdensome. Yet we cannot claim bodily autonomy as a reason to neglect the needs of a 1-year-old. Abortion seems to punish a fetus for its lack of bodily autonomy and deny the profound reliance that all of us who have bodies hold.
Yeah, and we're dependent on each other.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm dependent. I mean, even for the electricity in my house, I'm dependent on other folks. We're all dependent.
She goes on to say our choices about our bodies impact the bodies around us.
Sure, yeah. Now that makes sense to me as an argument.
Except in the horrible circumstances of rape or incest, which account for 1% of abortions, women and men both have bodily agency and choices about whether they will have sex, and therefore, if they are willing to accept the risk of new life inherent in it.
Yeah, see, but then again, we think we have individual rights to be able to have sex anytime we want, whereas we don't take into consideration the responsibility that goes along with that. We were saying before. Yeah. So anyway, that's my big question, folks. The reproductive. What about the unborn with all that? And I wish someone would give me a shot at that. Am I completely off with that? Does that make any sense at all? Let me know what you think about that. I would be very, very interested because that's my big thing. I watch it on the news and I even start talking to the television set.
Yeah.
What about the unborn? What about them? I get it. Women do have rights. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. There's a dignity there. Yes. But what about them? And here I am again, 72-year-old white guy. What do I know?
Yeah, what do you know?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
What did Jesus know? He was a Jewish guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, surrogacy. The church also takes a stand against the practice of surrogacy, through which the immensely worthy child becomes a mere object. At this point, Pope Francis's words have a singular clarity. Quote, "The path to peace calls for respect for life, for every human life, starting with the life of the unborn child in the mother's womb, which cannot be suppressed or turned into an object of trafficking."
But we do it. We do it, though.
In this regard, I deem deplorable the practice of so-called surrogate motherhood, which represents a grave violation of the dignity of the woman and the child, based on the exploitation of situations of the mother's material needs. A child is always a gift and never the basis of a commercial contract. Consequently, I express my hope for an effort by the international community to prohibit this practice universally. He's talking rather strongly about this.
And as he should. Now, there's a part down here in this paragraph that I would like to kind of bring out if I could. And along with what you were saying, first of all, treating the child as an object, I want to, now again, we're talking about this objectively. I understand individual person's feelings and struggles in your child. I just heard recently, and actually, Bridget talked about that last week about the struggle with infertility. 1 in 6 women struggle with infertility in this day, and that's a true thing. But that doesn't give us a right to treat someone as an object. I think that's what he's trying to say here. The whole idea of surrogacy is also a part of human trafficking in different ways. And and the child, a child's gift. Now it says this in paragraph 49. It says the child has a right to have a fully human and not an artificially induced origin. Now you might think that's kind of a weird statement. The child has a right to a fully human and not an artificially induced origin, and to receive the gift of a life that manifests both the dignity of the giver and of the receiver, of the adults involved with that in the act of marital sexual intercourse, and also to the child. The child has a right to a human origin, every dimension of the dignity of the conjugal union and of human procreation. There's a dignity to conjugal union. Wow, didn't know that. And also there's a dignity to human procreation. So we're saying the way human beings are conceived in the womb, there is a dignity to that. And that's, I think, part of what's going on there with all that surrogacy too.
Right.
So
Okay.
now here comes the big one.
Yeah, euthanasia and assisted suicide.
Well, that one, I think we can maybe agree on that one.
Yeah.
That's a problem. We don't want that. We don't. So
Yeah.
now we move into the whole idea of
You ready?
gender theory here. Yes.
Take time to put on our flak jackets and get ready for
Take a look
okay.
at this one here. So
Gender theory. This opening paragraph is critical to emphasize as we introduce the church's view on the subject. The church wishes, first of all, quote, to reaffirm that every person, regardless of sexual orientation, ought to be respected in his or her dignity and treated with consideration, while every sign of unjust discrimination is to be carefully avoided, particularly by any form of aggression and violence, end quote. For this reason, it should be denounced as contrary to human dignity the fact that in some places, not a few people are imprisoned, tortured, and even deprived of the good life solely because of their sexual orientation.
yeah, so here we are talking about these really naughty things about LGBTQI stuff. And so the church is saying up front with all this, every person is given a human dignity, no matter what. We need to treat people with that dignity. None of this prejudice, none of this, why are they doing such things? We have to try to understand people more and more with all this. I think that's really the important thing, and that's what they're trying to say here. And I think he's saying this because in his document he wrote about the whole idea of blessings. Remember that issue of blessings? And blessing couples that are same-sex couples, not blessing the individuals. Blessing individuals in that, but not blessing the union and saying the union's okay. But certain cultures went off on that, thinking that was some big issue. That's a cultural thing, not a church thing in many ways. And so Pope Francis, I think he's trying to do exactly what Jesus would do. So that statement there in the beginning of this whole section, I think is very kind of important that we say all those different things as we continue on with all this.
Because everybody's where they're at for different reasons.
Sure.
So
yes,
that's
yes.
and no matter what, it's that we need to. We have to show love.
Yes,
That.
constantly, and that to truly, I think when we began to talk about welcoming in church, and it sounds easy. Oh, welcome everybody. Glad you're all welcome. But to really welcome everybody, I think is really quite hard sometimes because inside of us, we all have our prejudices and judgments that we make all the time.
Right.
We got to be very, very careful about those things.
Yeah. While emphasizing respect for human rights, Pope Francis states, regrettably, in recent decades, attempts have been made to introduce new rights that are neither fully consistent with those originally defined nor always acceptable. They have led to instances of ideological colonization in which gender theory plays a central role. The latter is extremely dangerous since it cancels differences in its claim to make everyone equal. And I want to say here, when we talk about this and we talk about love and talk about the document, it's going to sound like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth, but that's not really what's going on here.
No, I know. Okay. It's important. We have to establish in one sense what is in opposition to human dignity and what is not. Now, we're going to be talking about things like all of this here that people will disagree are right and wrong in the same eyes that we see things as right and wrong, or good or bad, or healthy or unhealthy, or any way you want to kind of put all that stuff. And so we're going to realize that people are going to disagree with us and all that. I just got a little quote here from Lisa when she says, if a woman can announce her pregnancy after 1 week, she's carrying a child. It begins at conception. So it's kind of interesting you say that. If a woman feels like she's pregnant, she says, no matter what, even after 1 week, and I guess that's possible to even know that quickly. And once it's a woman herself, I guess, with all that, I'm pregnant, which means she's having a child.
Yeah.
I that's very nice. I kind of like that comment, Lisa. That was pretty good. But anyway, so there are many people that we're seeing. The Pope calls it ideological colonization, but in many ways, a lot of people see that much differently. May I, at this point, bring up Dr. Cass's statement here, just kind of quickly, or is that you're going to come to that?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, if you want to bring that up, we have a because I think we
Well,
have
maybe-
we have about 6 minutes. Is
just
how
go one
long
more.
is that?
I want to bring that up because that's very important. But let's go one more
Yeah.
step here and see what you got here.
Then we jump to 59.
Okay.
You want to do that?
I can do
Good for
that.
time.
Okay.
In regard to new rights being advanced by gender theory, this ideology envisages a society without sexual differences, thereby eliminating the anthropological basis of the family. It thus becomes unacceptable that some ideologies of this sort, which seek to respond to what are at times understandable aspirations, manage to assert themselves as absolute and unquestionable, even dictating how children should be raised. It needs to be emphasized that biological sex and the sociocultural role of sex can be distinguished but not separated.
Okay, so maybe that begins to talk about now. I there's a couple things I could bring up here.
Actually, I jumped over where we did want to talk about that letter, but
yeah, this right here. So that's
Yeah.
okay. We could do that here and now. This ideology envisions a society without sexual differences. Now, people think that's kind of confusing, but what they're saying is, by everybody choosing whatever sexual difference they want, I'm a cat, I'm a dog, I'm this, I'm that, I'm a she, I'm a we, or whatever else it is. We're blurring all the differences, and the church is saying there are these two great differences as male and female, and these are the great biological differences that are very, very important for us to be able to ponder. And it goes on to say it needs to be emphasized that biological sex and the socioeconomic culture of sex can be distinguished but not separated. In other words, some women and some men can do the same things, but they do them all as female and male. And I would say to you also, too, that never brought up in the document, there is a way in which we see maleness in a symbolic fashion and femaleness as a symbolic fashion. Let me just give you an example of what I mean. I'm talking to an adult audience here, I think.
Right.
So if you look at the sex organs on a male, they're on the outside, okay? What are men usually much better? Now, this is not exclusive, or this is not painted as black and white as I might be saying this. Well, men can usually, they can build the house. And then where the sex organs on a woman, they're on the inside. The woman builds the home. In a sense, the women are much better, and maybe you women will agree, you're much better at the inner world stuff, the inner stuff. You guys, like if I asked a woman, do you have an inner world? You have an inner world. I think pretty much anyone would say yes. If I ask a man, he might say, I don't know. What are you talking about? Because they're thinking about the outer world that much more. A man has to find his inner world, whereas a woman has to acknowledge her inner world. She already knows she has it. So I'm saying that these biological differences that we have are deeply symbolic and actually deeply theological in many ways, that we use these things in that fashion. And that means a lot. When we get rid of all the sexual differences of male and female, we blur all these things in a way that makes a tremendous amount of confusion, if I could say it that way. And then just to make the point that in this whole area of gender theory, there is a great debate going on. A group of people wrote the Pope a letter, and in the letter, which by the way, he wrote them back, and which we don't know the answer to the letter, but that some of the issues that they had, that they struggle with, concerns of possible rising homeless rate for transgender children being kicked out of their homes. That's an issue. Potential increase in hate speech. They're afraid that this document that was put up by the Vatican is going to create hate speech, discrimination, and violence. The decision to include gender theory and medical intervention for transgender people is potentially morally on par with poverty, war, human trafficking. But we're paying medical intervention for a child could be something that could do tremendous harm to that child if we understand the research that's happening and all that. The failure to recognize that transgender persons are seeking physical and mental integrity. Absolutely are. But there much more dialogue has to happen on that regard. The lack of scientific and theological studies cited in the document. There is a lack of scientific and theological studies cited in the document. That is absolutely true. Right. So the Pope wrote them back with all that. So that's just one thing about this whole issue of sexual differences and gender theory that are part of the issues we have to deal with here today.
Yeah, and we really are zipping through this. Bring us to sex change, because we just have a few minutes to talk about this before we're not experts. We don't claim to be, but we're going to hear from an expert. And as Bob Dylan said, you don't need to weatherman to know which way the wind blows. I can tell you what the thermometer says. We're just dealing in facts when we can. So teaching about the need and respect of natural order of the human person, Pope Francis affirmed that creation is prior to us and must be received as a gift at the same time. As opposed
to us manipulating all these different things with all that.
Yeah, if you want to follow up on this before.
Just one thing before we
in about 1 minute, we need to go to this.
We're going to show you a video. The video might get kicked off. Steve's going to put it on here in a few moments. And we want to say to you real quickly before we finish up here, well, hopefully we'll get back on with you one way or the other. But I want to say that this is an article that Jerry gave me by this Dr. Hillary Cass, says U.S. doctors are out of date on youth gender medicine. And I took away two things that she said in this document. Number one, she said, the question was, what are your top takeaways from this report? That she read to them that there is little evidence that these puberty blockers and these gender-affirming interventions medically to young people has been helpful. There's not much scientific evidence that is absolutely true. So this is what's your takeaway? And she says this: the lens of their gender, and see the second great big takeaway for me is that we have to stop just seeing these young people through the lens of their gender and see them as whole persons and address the much broader range of challenges that they have, sometimes with their mental health, sometimes with undiagnosed neurodiversity. It's really about helping them to thrive, not just how do we address their gender, how do we treat the whole person, right, she was saying, as opposed to just treating the gender issue. And the second thing she said in here, what Dr. Cass said, was that sadly, in the United States, all of this issue of gender and gender theory and all this stuff has been so profoundly politicized that science has been blurred by the politicization of all this different stuff. And again, we got our right-left thing that is saying these different things that are kind of blurring the issue for all of us. Now, we're going to share with you, I don't remember the doctor's name, but she is going to counteract another doctor's statement about this gender-affirming medical interventions for children and also the puberty blockers and the different medications they give. And she's going to respond to all that. So I'm going to ask Steve to put that up for us. And hopefully we'll get back with you for just a moment here. So it'll take us about 4 or 5 minutes just to say goodbye to you and talk about next week. So, Steve, if you want to put that up for us, that would be great. Now, if we get...
Thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Dr. Grossman for 5 minutes for your opening statement. thank you for the opportunity to address you. My name is Miriam Grossman. I am a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, author, and senior fellow at Do No Harm. I have been taking care of patients for 45 years. I'm going to use my time to respond to Dr. McNamara. First, I'm struck by her use of the phrase, sex assigned at birth. Sex is not assigned at birth. Sex is established at conception, and it's recognized at birth, if not earlier. Dr. McNamara claims that her views are science-based, but to claim that sex is assigned at birth is without any scientific basis whatsoever. Its language misleads people, especially children, into thinking that male and female are arbitrary designations and can change. That is simply not true. Dr. McNamara claims that social and medical interventions are the only evidence-based treatment and that scientific evidence shows it is life-saving. Without it, she's warning us, kids will commit suicide. Well, a growing number of countries have effectively banned the care to which she's referring. And thank God there's been no wave of suicides or other mental health catastrophes. 3 years ago, Finland placed strict limitations on medical interventions for minors. Sweden did the same thing after a 14-year-old girl was found to have osteoporosis and spinal fractures from puberty blockers. An investigation concluded, quote, the risks of anti-puberty and hormone treatment for those under 18 currently outweigh the possible benefits. The UK conducted a review and called the evidence very low. They've also placed severe restrictions on the care that Dr. McNamara calls life-saving. Norway also analyzed the data and has made similar changes in policy. The National Academy of Medicine in France warned, quote, great medical caution must be taken in children and adolescents given the vulnerability of this population and the many undesirable, even serious complications the therapies cause. Doctors in New Zealand and Australia have published similar statements. Is Dr. McNamara suggesting that all these countries are rejecting evidence-based treatment and placing their kids at risk of suicide? Regarding that point of view, Finland's gender expert, Dr. Rita Kaltiela, said, quote, it's purposeful disinformation, the spreading of which is irresponsible. All 7 countries, and Florida too, of course, concluded that kids don't need their development interrupted, the girls don't need their periods stopped and their voices lowered, and the boys don't need to grow breasts. What they need is psychotherapy. I have other objections to Dr. McNamara's testimony. She insists that her position, only hers, represents standard medical care. What she doesn't want you to know is that there is no standard. There's a debate. There's a fierce debate. And on the side opposite her stand such prominent figures as Stephen Levine, Kenneth Zucker, Paul McHugh, and James Cantor, among others. These doctors are giants in the field. They have been treating transgender patients and gathering data and publishing papers about them, and I mean no disrespect here, but since before Dr. McNamara was born. The point is that those veteran clinicians and others who have wisdom and experience are ignored because they disagree with the current narrative. They're against medical interventions for the same reason those 7 countries are. There is no evidence of long-term benefit, but there is evidence of harm. I'll end by quoting Jamie Reed, the courageous whistleblower from the Children's Gender Clinic in St. Louis. I believe that that hospital receives the medical education funding that we're discussing today. She said that doctors at that clinic said, we are building the plane while we are flying it. We are building the plane while we are flying it. That's how they described the treatment at their gender clinic. Our precious tax dollars should not support such a perilous experiment.
Okay, folks, I give that a lot to ponder. Things like sex is assigned at birth. No, it's assigned at conception and affirmed at birth. Male and female arbitrary? No, male and female is not arbitrary. And they're saying that these medical interventions are not really essential and doing great harm scientifically. And there is a continued debate, which we have to become part of that debate ourselves. So thank you very much for joining us. Jerry, any final word with all that?
No, there's too many things to be said, so I'll just say
Okay,
adieu.
it is a lot. We can continue the conversation, but next week we're off because that's the end of the month. And we were going to be talking about what we're going to be doing next month, the month of June, I guess, with all this and how we're going to be doing different things. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Jerry, for being Marty.
Thanks for letting me be Marty.
All right, you're very good. All right.
I
God bless you,
hope
folks.
I've held up to this standard.
I think you did. We're actually 2 minutes over, which Marty would never allow.
Oh, no, you don't allow that.
So thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye now.